Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gamer Telecom video, let us discuss some rumours that are taking the internet by storm. Well, perhaps not quite by storm, but they're at least eliciting some response. And these rumours are as follows. Activision are planning a takeover of Take-Two Interactive. So, this is actually the scuttlebutt, quote, on Wall Street. And it's actually being fueled by research from benchmark analyst Mike Hickey. Now, Mike Hickey has actually put together various reports which are being shown around various investment sites, which of course means pretty big things. Indeed, he's actually released a quote. For Activision, acquiring Take-Two Interactive would be a, quote, no-brainer. In our view, circling some of the strongest development talent and owning IP in the world within a company that has nearly $1 billion in cash and trades at a comparably lower multiple. In fact, remember that Activision are actually based in LA, which means that it actually has a very good working relationship with Hollywood. Now, considering that, first of all, Take-Two are courting the idea, well, in fact, they're actually internally sorting out a movie with GTA, of course, and the fact that, well, the extra cash that Activision has under its bed would be quite nice for it, it makes sense. In fact, Activision, and I quote, has arguably the three strongest development studios in the world with Rockstar, Bungie, and Blizzard. If Activision were to go ahead and buy Take-Two Interactive. And Hickey says that the internal plans for GTA movie are driven by the Hauser brothers, who control the franchise, might be, and I quote, aided by Activision's very deep pockets. Strangely enough, he also speculated that the deal might lead to an annualization of Take-Two's franchises. Ooh dear. And Take-Two stocks would be up about 4% today. So, way back in the midst of 2008, do you remember that time? It was well before the PS4 was released. It was back in a simpler time of PS3. EA made a bid to buy out Take-Two, and this bid was $2 billion, which is frankly ludicrous. But apparently, the Take-Two board rejected it because they believed it was, and I quote, undervalued. So, in other words, they felt that EA's bid was not quite enough cash. I just want you to let that sink in for a second. They didn't think that $2 billion was not enough cash, and this is one of the issues right now with AAA industries, as I've been saying. So, there are several points that I want to go over on this particular video before we close out. The first, I'm not one of those who hate Activision, but there are definitely some issues with Activision buying Take-Two. The idea of an annualized franchise, it depends how it works. Now, I have to admit, I'm not the biggest GTA fan in the world. I'm probably going to be getting some angry downvotes for that, but I've not even completed a GTA before, ever. I always get fairly far, but I just never get to the end. Either a save corrupts, or I have a situation where I just end up blowing up half the city and I just can't be bothered anymore. Whatever the hell happens, I just never have gotten to the point where I want to complete it. I actually got really far in GTA 4, but it just never seemed to happen. However, I will admit that Rockstar, who are of course under the Take-Two banner, make extremely good games. Now, despite the fact that yes, there are a couple of glitches, GTA, simply because of its open world nature, and even Max Payne 3, you could Google Max Payne 3 glitches, there are some quite hilarious ones, by the way. The games themselves are well narrated, they've got good storylines, a little bit cliche here and there, but overall very good. The graphics, of course, considering what they managed to get out of the PS3 and the Xbox 360, it's incredible. And not to mention the fact that I, for one, am really impressed, at least from the brief trailers and stuff we've seen, of GTA 5 on the next generation and the PC. As much as I do love the guys at Naughty Dog, I have to say that The Last of Us Remastered, it was okay, it was pretty good, but there were definitely very ropey areas here and there, and yes, they did complete it in 9-10 months-ish, but there were still really ropey areas, and in fact, I'll just be totally honest, I possibly should have been a bit more brutal in my graphics comparison between the PS3 and the PS4 versions of the game, because there were certainly, as I got a little bit further in, you could certainly start seeing that there are some areas which are, well, not quite up to snuff, particularly when it comes to some of the water in some of the submerged parts of the city. And anti-aliasing is also a little bit ropey, and you've also got some issues with shadows and a few other bits and pieces. My point being, somewhat long-winded as it may be, Rockstar seem to be doing the extra, going the extra mile, and they're by no means the only ones that are doing this. I have to say that I'm incredibly impressed with 4A and Metro Redux. I mean, for goodness sake, it's like £30, actually slightly less than that, for both the PC and the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One version, and it just plays incredible. I've been doing some frame rate testing today on the PS4 version of Metro, and at least according to what I've found so far, despite the fact that it's running a native buffer of 1080p, I cannot find many issues with the frame rate. I've not seen it dip below 60. Admittedly, I'm fairly early in my testing, but I've got to say, I've done some really stupid stuff, deliberately running into enemies and trying to cause as much rampant chaos as possible, and it just doesn't really seem to be dipping. There are a couple of slightly torn duplicate frames, but it's not too bad. One of the reasons for this is because they've spent a lot of time on the remastering. It's not really a remaster. I would actually go as far as to say that with Metro 2033, they've put a lot of time and effort into it. And this is exactly my point when it comes to GTA. GTA 5 on the PC and the next generation consoles is having a lot of work. And I know this is getting really maybe off the original topic, but the concerns I'm reading online, particularly on the comments of the idea of an annualization of the franchises, is yes, it could be great, and technically speaking, annualizing a franchise could work if you've got enough teams that are doing it. So for example, this just pure example, let's say it takes 100 people to make GTA, a GTA, just for example, and it takes them 3 years or 4 years. You could, for example, employ 300 people and get them each to put out a game in the same amount of time. So in other words, Team A puts out a game in year 1, Team B puts out a game in year 2, and so on. But reality, of course, is it's extremely expensive to have that many employees because, let's face it, a game doesn't typically have 100 people. On the other hand, for the planners and stuff, they don't necessarily have to be there in the later stages of the game, as well as the story writers and so on, particularly voice actors, all of those guys, once you've created that stuff, it's then down to programmers and testers and so on. So, you don't necessarily have to technically have 3 times the amount of people. So, there is that concern. Next of all, for the most part, Rockstar have a history of being fairly generous. Yes, there are the occasional microtransaction or the occasional piece of DLC and stuff. For example, Max Payne had a couple of extra multiplayer levels or weapons, and there are, of course, the ye old typical exclusive and premium editions of games in some cases, but overall, I'm sure you'll agree that they do a fairly good job of not screwing over the consumer. And Activision have a slightly less stellar history in this, and some may argue that it's actually negatively impacted Blizzard. In fact, I did a little bit of Googling earlier, and by all means please do as well, and there are actually a couple of online petitions, and obviously they're going to gain about as much traction as a tub of lard, but still, they do want, several of these petitions do want Activision to break up with Blizzard, or rather the other way round, Blizzard getting away from Activision. And indeed, following that train of thought, just for a second, Blizzard themselves, one of the reasons behind, at least one of the reasons that some people attribute to the decline, and I use massive quotation marks here, decline of World of Warcraft in terms of the quality of some of the expansions is because of Activision. They believe that since they have entered the partnership, it's had a negative impact, and they believe that for the most part Blizzard have become a lot more money hungry. I don't necessarily know if I would agree with that 100%, but you could definitely see some changes in just the way that Blizzard are communicating with their consumer. That's not to say that Blizzard have always been an exactly forthright company. They've always had that very much a Valve mentality in that respect. You know, they communicate, but they stop short, and there've always been that little bit of level of frustration. In fact, this even used to happen with World of Warcraft when I used to play, for example, back in like 2000, when was it, 2006, 2007, something along those lines. It was a while ago anyway. But anywho, I digress. I don't necessarily know if this is going to be doom and gloom. I also don't know if it's even going to happen. The rumours stating that the two companies are becoming very pally with one another. This is not a situation where it's just a rumour. They do seem to be getting quite close, and as I said, this is the scuttlebutt, if you will, on Wall Street, that there are some discussions going on behind the scenes. To reiterate, discussions don't necessarily mean a great deal. In business, you've always have these little meetings of, hey, what do you think about this? And it could even be that this is being blown way out of proportion by those who are involved in the meetings or those who are hearing about these meetings. Because let's just, for example, and I'm not saying this is the case, but let's just, for example, say that one director who is having or involved in the meetings along with several other managing directors, he could just happen to slip out something, hey, we're meeting with X because we're, discussing them getting involved with something, and then it can kind of spiral out of control. So it could be that case. I personally don't really want Activision, however, to get hold of Take-Two. Not because I dislike Activision. Some people will blame them for titles like Call of Duty. Personally, I don't really have a problem with Call of Duty. I don't play it that much. I haven't played it since Black Ops 1, I think. But I don't really have a problem with the franchise. If people enjoy it, great. Go for it. There's always a game out there. I have a slight issue with their attitude of throwing loads and loads of money at problems and kind of the marketing hype that's surrounding. But it would also be wrong of me to criticize Activision when Electronic Arts, and God help you, Ubisoft, I mean, to be honest, some of the stuff Ubisoft have done, for example, the whole Watch Dogs fiasco is, in my opinion, slightly worse than anything Activision have done, at least in my recent memory. Yes, they do riddle stuff with DLC. Yes, of course, they do have the pre-order culture, but that's part and parcel of the whole AAA. So it's not that I have a problem with Activision in those issues, if you will. The main problem I have with this is I don't necessarily want them to have yet another massive company in their control. It's kind of getting to the point where you almost feel that they have a little bit too much clout in the gaming industry. And this is something I will discuss in the next couple of days, because there's a couple of issues, to be honest, in gaming that's been really pissing me off of late, and I just feel that I want to make a bit of a rant. But it's outside of the scope of this video, so I don't want to get really involved in it. But I do feel that in some cases, some companies do definitely have too much sway with either the journalistic press, or generally speaking, too much sway with, say, retailers and so on, and I don't necessarily know if that's a particularly good thing. Plus, as well, as unlikely as it is, if there is any problem with Activision in the future, you never know what can happen. It's extremely unlikely. Some analysts are predicting a crash, particularly of the AAA industry. I don't necessarily think that's ever going to happen, to be totally honest, at least assuming they're smart about it, which is like 50-50 at best. But hey, let's assume that something bad did happen. Well, that's not really good for any of those caught in the umbrella. And as I mentioned, I don't really like the idea of annualization of GTA. That's not to say that I like how infrequently the titles from Rockstar come out, so the extra cash could certainly help them. But I do have concerns that then you're going to be getting, quantity over quality, and quantity over quality isn't a good way to do business, at least in this instance. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.